In this gripping story, John, an African-American mechanic, stops to help a stranded woman in the Arizona desert. What seems like a simple act of kindness soon turns into a dangerous web of lies and betrayal. Watch as secrets unfold, and John faces a shocking twist that will change everything. In the scorching desert of Arizona, near the Mexican border, the sun beat down relentlessly. John, a middle-aged African-American mechanic, was walking along the lonely highway beside his old worn-out car. He seemed like an ordinary man until he saw a woman named Emily, struggling with her car. She appeared to be in distress, her hands covered in grease as she stared helplessly under the hood. As John walked closer to offer his help, a patrol car suddenly appeared, pulling over beside them. Officer Martinez, a burly and stern-looking officer, stepped out of the vehicle. He looked at John with suspicion, his eyes narrowing. "Is everything all right here, ma'am? Is this man bothering you?" he asked, directing his question at Emily, while his gaze never left John. Emily quickly reassured him, "No, officer, he's just helping me." But Officer Martinez was unconvinced. He demanded to see John's identification, making it clear he didn't trust him simply because of the color of his skin. "I need to see your ID," he said, his tone implying John could be involved in something criminal. Feeling both insulted and frustrated, but wanting to avoid further conflict, John handed over his ID. Officer Martinez scrutinized it carefully, his gaze lingering on it for what felt like an eternity. The tension in the air was thick with unspoken judgment. Meanwhile, John noticed something strange as he continued to check over Emily's car. There were items in the trunk that seemed out of place, metal boxes and wrapped packages, none of which made sense. The more John inspected, the more suspicious he became. He was starting to wonder if Emily was more than just a woman in trouble. Maybe there was something darker hidden beneath the surface. Officer Martinez, still not convinced, decided to check the car himself. But John quickly stepped in, helping Emily cover up the suspicious items before the officer could see them. Once the officer had left, Emily let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you so much for helping me," she said, her voice soft and grateful. But John's mind was racing. There was something off about the whole situation. He looked directly at Emily and asked, "You're not telling me everything, are you? Who are you really?" Emily hesitated for a moment. She seemed to be weighing whether or not to tell him the truth. Finally, she sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Emily. My husband is a dangerous man. He's a notorious crime lord. He's controlled my every move for years. He's abusive, and I can't escape him. He's tried to kill me more than once." Her voice cracked as she continued. "He's paranoid, constantly thinking I'm cheating on him. Once he even held a knife to my throat while I was asleep, just because he thought I was seeing another man. I'm terrified. I need to get away, but he won't let me go." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly. John's heart softened as he listened to her story. He could see the pain and fear in her eyes. "I'll help you," he said, his voice firm. "I'll take you to the border, and we'll figure out a way to get you away from him. You don't deserve to live in fear." They drove through the desolate landscape of the desert, the car's engine humming steadily. As the hours passed, Emily slowly began to open up to him more. She started to flirt, a playful glint in her eyes, though John felt a sense of unease growing within him. There was something about her, something that didn't sit right, but he couldn't deny the attraction he felt. The further they went, the more Emily's flirtations became intense. She would smile at him and touch his arm, her voice soft and seductive. John, despite his doubts, found himself drawn to her more and more. As they neared the border, the tension began to build. Emily's behavior shifted, becoming more nervous and anxious. She clutched John's hand tightly, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice trembling. John squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll be fine. Just stay calm and trust me," he said with a confident smile. As they approached the border checkpoint, John spoke to the officer, explaining that Emily was his wife and that they were on vacation. Everything seemed fine at first until another officer insisted on inspecting Emily's suitcase. Emily's expression changed instantly. A look of panic washed over her face as the officer opened the suitcase. John's heart sank. Inside, he saw a terrifying array of weapons and drugs, things he never expected to find. Emily started to tremble, and in a desperate attempt to cover her tracks, she pointed at John. "It's him!" she screamed, her voice cracking with fear. "He's the mafia boss. All these drugs and guns, they're his. I'm just a victim. I was forced to help him." Tears streamed down her face and she fell to her knees. John's stomach dropped as he tried to process what was happening. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could this woman, who he thought was a victim, betray him like this? The suitcase contained evidence that pointed to him as the criminal. The shock was overwhelming. Before he could say anything, the officers moved quickly. They grabbed him, handcuffing him as Emily looked on with a cold, calculating smile. "You don't understand, do you?" she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "You were just a pawn in my game." As John was shoved into the back of the squad car, his mind raced. He was reeling from the betrayal, but he didn't give up. He knew there had to be a way out. As an experienced mechanic, he was familiar with the ins and outs of vehicles. With a few quick movements, he managed to slip out of the handcuffs. Fueled by anger and a thirst for justice, John slipped out of the squad car and sprinted towards Emily's car. He had to confront her, to get answers. But when he reached the vehicle, he overheard something that made his blood run cold. Emily was on the phone, speaking in a language he didn't understand. Then it hit him like a ton of bricks. Emily wasn't the victim. She was the mastermind, the leader of the mafia ring all along. She had been deceiving him the entire time. She had gone through plastic surgery to change her appearance, to hide her true identity. John felt a wave of disgust wash over him. He had fallen for a lie, for someone who had carefully planned every move. Just then, Emily turned around, spotting him. Her eyes narrowed and a sinister smile appeared on her lips. "I should have known you'd be trouble," she sneered, pulling out a gun from under her jacket. "I can't let you live." "You know too much," she said, her voice cold and full of malice. She aimed the gun at John, her finger tightening on the trigger. But at that moment, Officer Martinez, who had been watching from a distance, appeared out of nowhere. He quickly intervened, taking out his own weapon and shooting at Emily's hand, forcing her to drop the gun. A brief shootout ensued, but in the end, Emily was apprehended. John, though shaken, was relieved to be alive. He couldn't believe how close he had come to losing everything. As Emily was taken away in handcuffs, John realized just how dangerous the world could be, and how little he truly knew about the people around him. As Emily was handcuffed and led away, John stood there, still trying to process everything that had just happened. His mind was racing. The betrayal, the lies, the deception. It all felt like a cruel joke. He had trusted her. He had risked everything for her. And in the end, he was nothing more than a pawn in her twisted game. Officer Martinez approached John, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. "I know it's hard to believe, but you were just trying to help." John nodded, his mind still reeling from the shock. "I don't understand how I could have been so blind," he muttered. "How did I not see it?" Martinez looked at him with sympathy. "She's good at what she does. People like her, they know how to manipulate, how to deceive. It's not your fault." John let out a deep sigh, feeling both relief and frustration. Relief that it was over, but frustration at how easily he had been deceived. "I never should have trusted her," he muttered, his voice heavy. As the police took Emily away, John couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. He had survived, but the scars of this experience would stay with him forever. He knew that he would never look at the world the same way again. "It's over now," Martinez said, sensing John's unease. "You'll be okay. Just take it one day at a time." John nodded, but his mind was still consumed by the images of Emily, her manipulation, her deceit. It was hard to reconcile the woman he had trusted with the cold-blooded criminal who had used him. He looked up at the desert sky, the sun beginning to set in the distance. The landscape was vast and empty, a reminder of how alone he felt. But at least now he knew the truth, and sometimes that was all you could ask for. "Thanks," John said to Martinez, his voice steady now. "I appreciate your help." Martinez gave him a nod before walking away, leaving John standing alone in the desert. The sun had set, but the dark, endless horizon stretched before him, reminding him that there was still more to come. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was certain. He had survived, and that in itself was a victory.